The former Australian of the Year, Tim Flannery, has been appointed to a newly created position as Australia's Climate Commissioner. Professor Flannery will lead a panel of science, business and economics experts to provide advice to the community on climate change and to build consensus on how to reduce Australia's carbon emissions. Well, to talk about his new role, Tim Flannery joins us now in the studio. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure, Tony.
Is it true that having taken on this new role, you're no longer able to talk frankly about government policy?
I don't think so. I think the Commission's role is fairly straightforward. You know, what we need to do is to engage with the Australian public to really increase the quality of understanding of climate science. And that's going to involve quite a lot of listening as well, because unless we understand where people are now, it's going to be hard to encourage a better debate. We also want to have a look at the international treaty negotiations to get a bit more clarity around that. A lot of people think that the international negotiations have failed and that there's no action overseas. Well, that's just not true.
But can you and members of the Commission criticise government policy if you want to?
Well, yes, I think we could. See, at the moment there is no government policy in this area to criticise, you know, but...
Well, there's very low targets, for example, on carbon emissions.
Yeah.
You've been critical of that in the past.
Yeah, that's a bipartisan agreed target. But when it comes to policy, a few months down the track, I guess, when government does develop policy, I don't think we would be overtly critical of policy, but what we really would like to do is to take a real objective look at what the options are before us, what the science is telling us, what's happening overseas and what the options are for Australians. So I don't think we'll be directly addressing policy stances for either the opposition or the government, but we will, I hope, be able to shed some light on the bigger issues that surround those policy
Can
areas.
You advise government on policy? Is that part of your role?
That is not part of our role. The UK Climate Commission has that role. We don't. We're really more focused on the community.
Why doesn't that restrict your independence, not being able to advise the government if you see some obvious area where they should be moving?
Well, we're not constituted to do that. I guess there's nothing to stop individual commissioners as private individuals doing that, but as a commission, that's not our role.
OK, the opposition's Greg Hunt has immediately attacked the Commission as another piece, as he puts it, in Labor's jigsaw puzzle to try to justify their plan for an electricity tax. Your response?
I was a bit sad to read that because I think we are genuinely independent. We don't take advice from the Minister. Our role really is just to get a little bit more clarity and understanding in the public around these big issues, and we're going to have to make a decision, it looks like this year or next, around this, and everyone will be better served by getting a better understanding, I think, of the science, the economics and the politics around the issue.
He says it's written into your terms of reference that you're there to explain the purpose, his words again, of the government's policy to push up power prices.
Could I just say, Tony, there is no doubt that any option we take to deal with this issue will come with a cost, whether it is the current opposition policy or a carbon price. And that's unavoidable. No one in the Commission is trying to dodge that particular reality. But our job really is to try to get a greater understanding in the community of what the most cost-effective path of action is, what the most socially beneficial action is, and quite frankly, the most effective path of action.
But will it be just to follow Greg Hunt's argument to its logical conclusion, will it be part of your brief to argue the case for higher electricity prices as the inevitable consequence of reining in carbon emissions?
Well, no one wants higher electricity prices, certainly us commissioners don't, but it is an inevitable corollary that if you address this issue using any mechanism, there will be a cost. So, and that is it's an investment in our future. The opposition policy as it stands at the moment comes with a cost to the Australian people, and any price on carbon will come with a cost.
But the cost being increased electricity prices for ordinary folk.
That's right. And look, do you know what? The way I think of it, Tony, and we really should get our economic experts to address this, but for me, it's a bit like having an old car. That you keep on investing in to keep the thing on the road. Well, our current electricity grid's like that. Prices have been rising because a lot of monies have to be invested in upgrading old infrastructure. The day comes eventually when you might want to actually buy a new car. Now, that's a major investment, as an investment in any sort of initiative to deal with the carbon problem is. But at the end of the day, you're probably better off. In the longer term, having made that investment, we'll be better off.
Was Ross Garnaut right when he said that Queenslanders should back policies to rein in carbon emissions because global warming will intensify extreme climate events like the floods and the cyclones which they've been experiencing?
Look, we've got a science advisory group advising the Commission. I don't really want to preempt their work on this. But what I can say is that, over the last 3 years we've seen the longest drought in Australian history, the worst bushfire, one of the largest cyclones, and some of the worst flooding. And what the climate scientists were predicting even 20 years ago was there would be an increased frequency of extreme weather events. Now, whether what we've seen over the last 3 years adds up to a sort of proof, if you want, that we're now outside the envelope or not, I've got to defer to our climate advisory board. But I think it's a warning for people that this sort of thing is what the scientists predict would happen, and we don't want to see more of in future.
Well, you wrote a book called The Weathermakers, and so my question is the heating of the, let's say, the Pacific Ocean responsible, do you believe, for some of the intensity in those storms that hit Queensland?
The science that was produced 4 years ago now in the US on this showed that about half of the extra intensity in these hurricanes in the northern hemisphere was due to warming of the oceans. Now, we can extrapolate that's likely to be true here, but as I said, Tony, with the latest update on what the situation is in Australia, I really think that the Commission needs to hear from its advisory board. It's our first day of business. We haven't actually got there yet, but we will be reporting on that.
Ross Garnaut has been accused by prominent sceptics of politicising the Queensland disasters. And in the past, these sceptics, some of them, have actually been travelling in kind of bandwagons around the Australian countryside, convincing people that climate science is fraudulent. Will you be doing the opposite? Will you be travelling in a bandwagon to the same locations, trying to convince people that those sceptics got it wrong?
We're definitely going to be visiting regions, and we are going to be engaging with people. I don't think we're going to be out there trying to convince people point blank that we're right. I think we've got a lot of listening to do as well, try to work out where people are at, and just try to explain the basics of climate science. The waters have become so muddied, in part, as you've said, because of these bandwagons of people really trying to mislead people as to what mainstream science is saying. And we've got a big job there.
In helping to educate Australians about climate science, how will you explain to people that in terms of having an impact on global warming, what happens in Australia is largely symbolic? What really matters is what happens in the United States, in China, in India, and in the emerging economies, the largest of them.
Well, and that is, I guess, the issue that we're going to try to address when we look at the international negotiations. Australia is a not insignificant player in this. You can imagine our minister turning up at international negotiations, meeting, say, the Chinese or the Indian minister, and the Indian minister saying to him, well, you're an affluent country. You've got very high level of emissions. What are you doing? Why do you expect us to do anything? So we all have to move together on this. Countries, there are significant things happening in places like China and many areas overseas where by no means a first mover, and an important job in the Commission is really to relay to people what the reality is of the international situation.
Does Australia, do you believe, have any responsibility for how the billions of tonnes of Australian coal that are exported to countries like China and India are burnt, and what happens to the emissions?
Well, under the Kyoto arrangements, which we're still operating under at the moment, the responsibility for those emissions lie with the country that burns the coal, not with the one that exports it.
But is that? Do you see that as being correct morally?
Personally, is it correct morally? Well, that is a really profound question, and I can see from a marketplace perspective, the argument is that if we don't supply the coal, someone else will, and I think there are difficulties in terms of us addressing the issue through export. I think really at the moment the focus is on what we combust. And 80% of our electricity comes from the burning of coal. In future, that if we hope to honour our international commitments, that's one of the things that's likely to change.
Tim Flannery, it's the first of what undoubtedly will be many conversations on this subject.
Sure.
For you and for you on this program. So we look forward to that, and we thank you very much for coming in tonight.
Thanks very much, Tony.